This is episode 113 of That Shakespeare Life. That Shakespeare Life is now available on our very own digital app. This app works on your tablet, phone, or TV and lets you explore the history of William Shakespeare with exclusive content, interviews, and documentaries not available anywhere else. You can cook, dance, and play your way through the life of William Shakespeare, all without any commercials. Find out more at casticash.com/experience and stay tuned after the episode for even more details.
Hi, I'm Dan Falk, science journalist and author of The Science of Shakespeare. Another great way to explore the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Copernicus published his new model in 1543, new model of the solar system, with the sun at the centre and the planets and the Earth orbiting around it. These ideas very quickly came under attack in both the Catholic and Protestant countries of continental Europe. So only in England was it safe to discuss these ideas.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In 1572, when William Shakespeare was just 8 years old, a large supernova streaked across the sky, making a lifelong mark in the memory of not just a young William Shakespeare, but across the collective consciousness of all of England who saw it that night. At the height of Renaissance thought and during the time Galileo was presenting his ideas in Italy, William Shakespeare was writing Hamlet, King Lear, and other plays which not only allude to the work of famous physicists and astronomers of the 16th century, but in some cases include the very stars that they studied and the family relatives of some of these astronomers by specific names. We do not often connect William Shakespeare and his work in theater with Euclidean geometry or the Copernican theory of the universe, but when we study the life of the bard, we discover that he was not only well-educated in both, but contemporaries to the bard, like Thomas Digges and Tycho Brahe, were publishing works right alongside the plays of Shakespeare that captured the attention of England and Europe during the 16th century. Our guest this week, Dr. Michael Rowan Robinson, has published extensively on the topics of mathematics, astronomy, and Shakespeare, and he is here today to explain the mathematical history of the bard, including the influence of Copernicus and Kepler on plays like Hamlet and King Lear. Michael Rowan Robinson is Senior Research Investigator and Emeritus Professor of Astrophysics at Imperial College London. He was head of astrophysics at Imperial from 1993 to 2007 and President of the Royal Astronomical Society from 2006 to 2008. He works on infrared and submillimeter astronomy and observational cosmology. He has worked on a series of infrared space astronomy missions, including IRAS, ISO, Spitzer, Herschel, and Planck. He was awarded the Hoyle Medal of the Institute of Physics in 2008 and has an asteroid named after him. He is the author of several books, including Cosmic Landscape, Our Universe, Ripples in the Cosmos, 9 Numbers of the Cosmos, and Night Vision. Recent articles and essays include Aristotle, the First Physicist, Reflections on Kant and Herschel, The Interaction of Theory and Observation, and Shakespeare's Astronomy. He writes a monthly column called Stars and Tides in the Southweld Organ and is president of the Dash Astronomical Society. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
One of my favorite trivia pieces on Shakespeare is that Galileo and Shakespeare were born in the same year. Galileo would outlive William Shakespeare by almost 30 years, though. But as contemporaries in different countries, Michael, do you think they knew about each other?
Well, it's a lovely idea, and it's absolutely true that they were born the same year. No, there's no evidence that Shakespeare knew about Galileo, no really hard evidence. Galileo only became prominent outside Italy in 1610 with his discovery of the 4 inner moons of Jupiter and publication of the book The Starry Messenger, which was a big hit around Europe. There is one moment in Shakespeare which some people like to take as a hint that Shakespeare is referring to Galileo. So in his late play Cymbeline, Jupiter appears, the god Jupiter appears, and 4 spirits dance round the dreaming Posthumus. So could that be a hint about the moons of Jupiter, which were quite a big news story in the 1610s? So that's a possibility. It's a bit far-fetched, I think. The one thing in its favor is the fact that Jupiter is mentioned many times in this play, the god Jupiter. And if you look at the other Roman plays by Shakespeare, Jupiter's hardly mentioned at all. So was Jupiter on Shakespeare's mind when he's writing this play? Who knows? Now, the other way around, Galileo is unlikely to have known about Shakespeare because the first performance of a Shakespeare play in Italy was in 1842. So,
wow.
So Shakespeare was not known in Italy in his lifetime. Galileo was known in London after 1610, so it's not impossible that Shakespeare heard about him.
Today, the geometry we learn in high school is the same Euclidean geometry Shakespeare references in his plays. Michael, did Shakespeare also learn these concepts in school the way we do today, or would he have studied them independently?
Well, it's believed that Shakespeare attended Stratford Grammar School, and if so, he would have learnt about Euclid. And in fact, it's interesting that Latin, Greek, and Euclid were still being taught in schools in England in the 1950s when I went to school. So I shared the same education as Shakespeare. Start with. Shakespeare often talks about the spheres, but always in an astronomical sense. Well, The Tempest has been described as a geometrical play, but I don't know of any examples where Shakespeare uses Euclidean terms like square, triangle, circle, sphere, parallel in a true geometrical sense. He does use the words in other meanings, but I don't know that geometry had such a big hold on Shakespeare's mind. But Shakespeare was very interested in the night sky, and there are hundreds of references to the moon, the stars, planets, comets, meteors, and eclipses in his plays and poems.
Today, we know that one of these items of the night sky, the supernova that streaked across Europe when Shakespeare was just 8 years old, we know it today as the Tycho star, and remnants of this actual star that Shakespeare saw over 400 years ago are actually still visible and available in photograph on NASA's website, which we will link to in the show notes for today's episode, so you can see those for yourself and literally be looking at the same star Shakespeare was looking at. But Michael, for Shakespeare, did he understand that he was witnessing a supernova? What was the cultural response to this event in 1572?
Yes, it's been suggested that there's a reference to this supernova in the first scene of Hamlet. So Bernardo speaks of yon star that's westward from the pole. And it seems that from the time of night and the time of year, he's referring to somewhere around the constellation of Cassiopeia. This was where a very bright star appeared suddenly for some months in 1572. It was studied by Tycho Brahe and also by many others, including the English astronomer Thomas Digges, whom Shakespeare may well have known. So we now know that this is one of a very small number of supernovae in our own Milky Way galaxy, the explosion of a massive star that has reached the end of its life. Well, when I say a small number of supernovae that have been seen with the naked eye. Shakespeare was only 8 years old in 1572, but he could have been shown the star as a child, for example, by his mother, who was a farmer's daughter and seems to have been interested in the stars. So her epitaph in Stratford Church, probably written by Shakespeare's sister, ends, "Come quickly, Christ, that my mother, though shut in the tomb, may rise again and see the stars." So it seems that Shakespeare's mother was interested in astronomy, knew the night sky because she was a farmer's daughter, and could possibly have got Shakespeare interested. Somebody must have got Shakespeare really interested in the night sky because he is so interested in it. Shakespeare could also have learnt about the supernova from Thomas Digges, whom he may have met in London, and Digges studied and wrote about Tycho's star. The supernova had a big impact across Europe because it was the first time a new star like this had been seen for centuries. Now, coincidentally, the only other supernova in our galaxy visible to the naked eye in the last 1,000 years also occurred in Shakespeare's lifetime in 1604. It's really weird that Shakespeare could have seen 2 supernovae in our galaxy. So this is known as Kepler's supernova. And Ben Jonson refers to this new star in his play Volpone, written in 1605. So new stars did have a big impact, and perhaps that's what Shakespeare's talking about here.
Peter Usher, a physicist who studies quasars and presented in 1997 at the American Astronomical Society, shared that he thought the character of Hamlet was espousing the theories of Thomas Digges, a contemporary to William Shakespeare. And Digges in the 16th century expanded Copernicus' theory of a heliocentric universe to include the idea that stars were not, as modern thought held at the time, resting on crystal spheres, but instead extending into infinite space. Michael, does Shakespeare's inclusion of Copernican theory in his plays, and particularly how he represents it in Hamlet, where he demonstrates the popularity of this discussion, does that indicate there was some kind of cultural divide in terms of which way popular thought was going to go when he was writing this play?
In the time of Shakespeare, England was the hotbed of Copernicanism. So Copernicus published his new model in 1543, new model of the solar system with the sun at the center and the planets and the Earth orbiting around it. These ideas very quickly came under attack in both the Catholic and Protestant countries of continental Europe. So only in England was it safe to discuss these ideas. There were 2 prominent pro-Copernican circles in England at the time. One was centered on Queen Elizabeth's advisor, John Dee, and the other on the Earl of Northumberland. And writers associated with these circles included Spenser, Sidney, Marlowe, and Donne. And Shakespeare himself would have had links with these writers, and also with others in these circles, like John Florio and Thomas Harriot. There was a route where Shakespeare could have heard about Copernican ideas. So did he write about the new worldview in his plays? Well, on balance, I think it is clear that he did. Peter Usher focuses on Hamlet, where there are several suggestive quotes. So, for example, in his letter to Ophelia, Hamlet writes, "Doubt not that the sun doth move." But in saying it, he is casting doubt on that. In other words, he's told the audience already that he doesn't love Ophelia. So we ought to doubt that the sun moves. Later, he says, "I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself king of infinite space." So this was a very radical idea in Elizabethan England, the idea of infinite space. And it had been introduced by Thomas Digges, as you say, and 1576. And it seems that Shakespeare is talking about this spectacular new idea of infinite space at that point. So there's some other interesting quotes, I think, as well. When Hamlet jumps into Ophelia's grave, he says, "What is he whose grief bears such an emphasis, whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars and makes them stand still like wonder-wounded heroes? This is I, Hamlet the Dane." So again, it suggests that this new world order, in which it is not the sun and stars that move, but the earth, that is on Hamlet's mind. His sort of general angst about the overthrow of the world, the old world system that wasn't being talked about in his day, it comes out when he talks to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He says, "And indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave overhanging firmament, this majestical rood fretted with golden fire, why, it appears to me no other thing than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapours." So here I think I would interpret this Hamlet showing that the whole world order is being overthrown. And then there's another thing, again from Hamlet. After he's met the ghost of his father, he uses an odd turn of phrase. He says, "Remember thee, aye, thou poor ghost, while memory holds a seat in this distracted globe." Well, now, some scholars say, "Oh, well, globe, he meant skull. He meant in his head, his distracted head." But,
or the theater, I mean.
What they're saying is he's talking about his skull in his distracted head. But everywhere else that Shakespeare talks about globe, he means the earth, except in The Tempest, when he talks about, he means also the Globe Theatre. There are other suggestions that Shakespeare's talking about the New World Order. So, for example, in Troilus and Cressida, Ulysses, in a famous speech on order, says, "And therefore is the glorious planet Sol in noble eminence enthroned and sphered amidst the other, whose medicinable eye corrects the ill aspects of planets' evil." This sounds very like the sun controlling the orbits of the planets. And I particularly love the chorus's prologue to Act 4 of Henry V. "Now entertain conjecture of a time when creeping murmur and a pouring dark fills the wide vessel of the universe." This seems to be the first use of the word universe in the English language, with the meaning totality of the celestial world. So I think Shakespeare shows in many places that this new world order is on his mind.
As Michael points out, England was unique in Europe for their acceptance of this new world order, as other nations surrounding England were not tolerant of a heliocentric perspective. We see that very clearly in the life of Galileo. As an example, Michael, please explain what happened to Giordano Bruno, the Italian mathematician and poet, when he incorporated Copernican theory into his philosophy in Italy.
Yes, Bruno is a very interesting case. He's quite an eccentric character. He seems to have encountered the Copernican vision during his 2 years in England in 1583 to 5. And he espoused this vision in several books and pamphlets. And he also took Thomas Digges' suggestion of an infinite universe further to suggest there were many inhabited worlds like the Earth, where the inhabitants would not recognize the Pope's authority. It's for radical views like this, and another, for example, that Mary was not a virgin, that he was indicted by the Inquisition and burnt at the stake in 1600. His support of Copernicus did not appear in the list of charges, although I don't expect it counted against him, but he wasn't actually charged with supporting Copernicus when he was tried. The thing that really turned the church against Copernicus was Galileo's publication of the Starry Messenger, and that raised the temperature, and Copernicus's work was almost immediately placed on the Catholic Church's index of banned books.
Hamlet is not the only play to belie the understanding of astronomy in 16th century England, as we find in King Lear a reference to eclipses. Michael's research calls attention to Edmund, saying, quote, "Edmund ridicules the idea that eclipses portend anything. Gloucester knows very well that there is a natural explanation for eclipses, but still thinks they must mean something," end quote. Michael, how many eclipses had occurred during Shakespeare's lifetime?
Yes, that's a very good point. That's a very interesting line by Gloucester near the beginning of Lear, talking about these late eclipses in the sun and moon. And how many eclipses could Shakespeare have seen? Well, of course, there are at least somewhere and at least partial eclipses of the sun and moon every year. But total eclipses of the sun are much rarer from any particular place on Earth. There was a very prominent near-total eclipse of the sun visible from London in 1605, around the time Shakespeare was writing Lear. So Gloucester can speak to the audience of these late eclipses in the sun and moon, and they will have known what he was talking about. The solar eclipse of 1605 had been preceded by an eclipse of the moon 2 weeks earlier. Shakespeare might also have seen a prominent total eclipse of the moon in 1591 in England. So he may just have read about eclipses, but he could also have seen them. It's quite possible that in 1605 he might have seen that eclipse of the sun. Eclipses come into other plays. So, for example, in Othello, after he's killed Desdemona, Othello says, "O insupportable, O heavy hour, methinks it should be now a huge eclipse of sun and moon, and that the affrighted globe should yawn at alteration." And in Antony and Cleopatra, Antony foresees his downfall. "Alack, our terrene moon is now eclipsed, and it portends alone the fall of Antony."
As the audience was hearing these lines, was this kind of like a skit on Saturday Night Live where he's poking fun at a hot topic of the day? Or is Shakespeare's expectation that the audience is going to have this rudimentary knowledge of astronomy and celestial motion?
I mean, he could have expected some of the court audience to know about astronomy. They might have been educated at university and that kind of thing. But what about the groundlings, in the pit in front? In Midsummer Night's Dream, the mechanicals, who would have been like the groundlings, consult an almanac to see whether the moon will be up when they are due to perform their play. And in Henry IV, Part 1, the porters in the inn yard used the plough, also known as Charles Wain, to tell the time. Hey ho, and be not four by the day, I'll be hanged. Charles Wain is over the new chimney, and yet our horse not yet packed. So it seems that in the ordinary working men and women that he shows in his plays, he thinks they knew about it. He expects them to know about astronomy. And I think he thought that the groundlings were familiar with the night sky. They might not know any of the theory, but they knew he expected that they would know the night sky.
And that goes back to your reference to his mother being a farmer's daughter and the idea that the working class...
I think so, yes. That's right. I think that ordinary people were out, if they were out at night, especially as part of their job or whatever, they'd see the night sky and they'd be aware of its motion and things that you see.
Hamlet's most famous traitorous friends in the play are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are very specifically named by Shakespeare after the ancestors of Tycho Brahe. Michael, who are the real Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and how do we know Shakespeare named these characters after them specifically?
Well, yes. In 1590, the famous Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe sent a copy of a book with his heraldic shield in the frontispiece to his friend Thomas Digges. And the names of two ancestors shown on this shield are Eric Rosencrantz and Sophie Guildenstern. So those are the names of Hamlet's two treacherous friends.
And it's not exactly Smith and Jones. So
it's not exactly Smith and Jones. They're the only characters with really Danish names in Hamlet. So he got them from somewhere. Now, Shakespeare almost certainly knew Thomas Digges, and because when Digges died in 1595, his widow married Thomas Russell, who became the executor of Shakespeare's will. And Thomas's son, Leonard, wrote a touching poem about Shakespeare for the 1623 First Folio collection of Shakespeare's plays. So Shakespeare knew the Digges family and could have seen, maybe he saw this Tycho's shield and just grabbed the names from that. So that's certainly one theory of how he got those names.
Yes, of course, Michael's work calls attention to another possible Rosencrantz and Guildenstern who might have also inspired Shakespeare. Michael, who are the Danish ambassadors you consider also in the running for having inspired these characters for Shakespeare?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Two Danish ambassadors came to London in 1592, and they were cousins of Tycho Brahe's with the same surnames. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Unfortunately, it's quite a common Danish. They're quite common Danish names. Maybe they are like
apparently.
So we'll probably never know where Shakespeare really got these names from, but it's. I like to think he got them from Thomas Digges.
You mentioned Thomas Digges was the son of Leonard Digges, or the other way around?
No, he was the son of. He had a son called Leonard, and his father was called Leonard. So there were two. There was Leonard Senior, and there was Leonard Junior.
Leonard Sr. was also another famous mathematician credited with inventing the telescope prior to Galileo, I think. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay. Does that mean there was a working telescope in England during Shakespeare's lifetime? Had he seen one of these?
I don't know whether he saw one, but there were telescopes in England because they were being manufactured in Holland in the early 17th century. Now, according to Thomas Digges, his father, Leonard, experimented with a telescope in the 1550s. However, Thomas was only 13 when his father died, so this may not be very reliable evidence, and there's nothing else to support it. We're just relying on what Thomas said about his father. However, another contemporary of Shakespeare, Thomas Harriot, who was a member of the Earl of Northumberland circle, and he also had links with Shakespeare because he had in his possession one of the few bits of Shakespeare's handwriting. Anyway, he certainly did make observations of the moon with a telescope in 1609, perhaps even slightly before Galileo, but he didn't publish his findings. And so all these great discoveries that Galileo announced in his book Starry Messenger, Harriot could have got credit for some of it, but he never published anything.
Johannes Kepler was writing about music of the spheres around this same time. Does that suggest Shakespeare was also studying Kepler's work?
Well, yes. One of Kepler's big ideas was the harmony of the spheres. And Shakespeare does talk about this too. In Pericles, we have the line, "The music of the spheres, list my Marina." And Olivia in Twelfth Night says to Viola, "Would you undertake another suit? I'd rather hear you to solicit that than music from the sphere." Kepler didn't publish these ideas until well after Shakespeare's death. It's unlikely that Kepler and Shakespeare met. Kepler never came to England. Shakespeare didn't go to Prague. But I have investigated Kepler's letters to see whether he wrote about the harmony of the spheres to English correspondents. So Kepler wrote to Shakespeare's employer, James I, but only about one of Kepler's obsessions, astrology, which James I disapproved of. Kepler wrote to the adventurer Christopher Hayden about the harmony of the spheres, and the latter was a friend of the historian William Camden, who in turn was a friend of John Dee and Ben Jonson, and the latter certainly was known to Shakespeare. Kepler also wrote to Thomas Harriot, who we've already mentioned, but doesn't seem to have mentioned the harmony of the spheres. So it's a bit tenuous. There is a possible route that Shakespeare could have heard about Kepler's idea. I think it's more likely that he's just talking about the old Archimedean idea of the music of the spheres.
Obviously, this entire topic of Copernicus, Euclid, and Shakespeare is a wealth of information to explore. And I know that we would love to learn more about this topic. Michael, what are some of your favorite books and resources which you might recommend we use to learn more?
Well, I think there are two really excellent books on Shakespeare's astronomy. One is by Dan Falk, called The Science of Shakespeare. And the other is by David Levy, The Starlight Night. They're both astronomers. They're both excellent books, and they talk about many of the things that I've talked about with you.
We will link to the resources Michael mentions today, both of these resources, as well as Michael's research, which you should read, all in the show notes for today's episode. So make sure you check there to find that. It's cassidycash.com/episode 113. Now, Michael, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Yeah, well, the complete works of Shakespeare would be pretty inexhaustible, but I think I would take the collected poems of the Greek poet George Seferis, whom I met in my youth, and was a great inspiration to me.
What a wonderful choice. You'd be well set up on your deserted island for sure. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I'm a freelancer these days, really, because I used to have a team working with me, but now I just potter about on my own. What I've been doing recently is I've been trying to find the 9th planet in historical infrared data.
So just a small project then.
Small and not likely to be successful.
Well, I hope that you find it, and we look forward to hearing about your work and how that goes. Thank you so much, Michael Rowan Robinson, for being here and taking us through the world of Copernicus, Euclid, and Shakespeare. This has been a really exciting conversation.
Thank you very much. It's been very enjoyable.
As always, we have pictures, diagrams, and links to all of the resources Michael mentions in today's episode, all packed into the show notes. Michael himself has published extensively on this topic, and you can't go wrong checking out any of his numerous books and articles on the subject. I personally recommend Shakespeare's Astronomy to you as the one to start with, and there are several others that he recommends linked in today's show notes. You can find all of the history, pictures, and links at CassidyCash.com/episode 113. That's CassidyCash.com/EP113. How would you like to see the video of this week's interview? You can watch this interview as well as other exclusive interviews not available anywhere else right inside That Shakespeare Life app. That's right. That Shakespeare Life is now streaming on our very own digital app. We are very excited to make this available. And not only can you stream podcast episodes anywhere you go, but the app contains exclusive content like activities, games, documentary shorts, expert interviews, and animated plays, all free from ads and available anywhere you you might be. You can learn Shakespeare's history from the experts who know him best while you're in the carpool line, cooking dinner, or even while you're working out. Take Shakespeare history with you wherever you go, all without any commercials. Download the app now at CassidyCash.com/experience. That's CassidyCash.com/experience. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.